Okay, hello. I'll introduce myself a bit. I should make the acknowledgement that I'm here as an imposter. I'm not a geospatial analyst. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm an excavator and photographer. And in many ways, I'm the monkey in the machine who's producing data for other people. And it's much a more microscopic view of things than the previous paper. Move on. I will be showing images of actual human remains later on, so if anyone's got a problem with that, then please leave. I've also noticed some people who I'm probably going to be referencing quite badly, so I apologise for that as well. Okay, I also want a bit of audience participation because I'm not used to speaking, and this is quite scary. So if you all join in, hands up, who's got a skeleton? Hey, most of you, great. It'll also serve to try and narrow down the particular topic that I'm talking about. Who's got skeleton in 3D? Who's got 3D data skeletons? Okay, not so many of you. Who's got 3D data of skeletons in situ? Okay. Yeah. How many of you actually use that data when you're doing your final research and interpretation? More than I thought, but still still few of you have the data. And then just out of my own interest, how many of you routinely take multiple models of individual skeletons? Okay, one of you, right. And me. Okay. I will go through a bit of a summary about 3D recording in archaeology. I'll just have to find my place. Ooh, microphone. Okay, adoption of 3D recording in archaeology is well attested. There have been a variety of approaches to 3D documentation and excavations, ranging from end-of-day snapshots, which we saw a bit of today in one of the other sessions, systematic single-contact modelling, or only modelling things of importance. One of the most common uses is for inhumations, but it's still not by any means standard practice, and the way it's applied isn't standardised either. Among the well-known advantages are data capture times. That's a huge advantage. Also resolution compared to traditional modelling. That's not a very good example of it. But also being able to record things which are ordinarily quite difficult to plan. I'll go back. Last year's CAA and a few other conferences, there have been some of the UK companies demonstrating that this kind of recording isn't only useful in these three main ways, but it's also cost effective even when they take into long-term archiving with trusted repositories. So there's a definite strong reasons for uptake. If we go beyond the field capture itself, there have been some very good examples of taking this data and starting to integrate them into more complex interfaces and join the data up. Specifically, Elk and Eng very recently with their online web viewer, which takes a slightly different view approach to some where they start segmenting out the 3D models that they've generated, whereas a lot of other approaches will adopt approaches more familiar to 2D based planning with tracing and using vector lines and these kind of things. However, a lot of the time this kind of integration is far from is a non-trivial task, and it's out of reach of a lot of projects to really get that advantage. And this is where it's a little bit more contentious. Is arguably a lot of the really good advantages, the data capture, the cost efficiency, the interlinked data, don't necessarily require 3D. In some ways, especially where certain workflows are following these 2D plan tracing and integration in more planar models, the 3D data is almost accidental. Well, not incidental, I should say. Now, part of the result is that although archaeology is fundamentally a 3D experience, a 3D discipline which has always worked in 3D, when it comes down to actually interacting and thinking in 3D, this is less Oh, I've lost my train of thought. I'll start again. Yeah. When we start, the types of 3D thinking which is allowed by the 3D data, which we're now more routinely collecting, I would say, is subtly different to the types of 3D thinking which is familiar within the archaeological practice. There are sometimes tensions between people in the more technocentric areas of archaeology and more traditional based practitioners. The archaeologists don't think in 3D. This isn't true, but there are certainly subtle differences which can be gained through these interactions with different types of data. However, meaningful interaction with 3D material from a lot of the published records so far seems somehow elusive. So why are we recording skeletons in 3D if a lot of the time we're not necessarily interacting with them directly in 3D when it comes to our post-process analysis? And what should we be looking to direct our on-site choices for data collection strategies and processes? Go back. Yeah, in some parts, the origin of this talk has perhaps come from a crisis of faith. So having spent years and years taking the photos, making these models, and seeing the widespread adoption around me, at the same time, it's harder to find anyone who can really point out and say exactly why it is that they're doing it. However, there are lots of other developments in 3D technology which are being applied both to human remains off-site, which I'll skip on. Yay! I'm not going to talk about that, obviously. There's lots of wonderful things with outreach and these kind of things, but I'm more interested in the types of processes and interpretation processes we go through as archaeologists on site. So there's a lot of adoption of 3D recording in crime scenes investigation, as well as in archaeology and medical sciences, people using it to characterize injuries, looking at fracture patterns, very detailed analysis of cut marks and things like that. However, a lot of these are done ex situ rather than in situ, even though quite often the same methodology and capture techniques used off-site are those which are applied on-site. However, we give ourselves different baselines when recording in the field rather than out of the field. There are many practical reasons for this, however, the grim reality of archaeology is more often than not either preservation or financial constraints mean that full osteological investigations are not a reality. And we have a growing corpus of 3D data from excavation, but little direction in terms of what the appropriate data quality should be in the future. One of last year's talks I thought was quite nice, which illustrates some of the nuanced ways in which we can think differently in 3D as familiarity with 3D data becomes more widespread within the field. I was looking at the taphonomic processes recorded at a body farm, where, and I don't know if anyone's seen that video, but it's well worth having a look. And it's when talking through when working on site and talking with all the other archaeologists who less frequently interact with this data, it becomes apparent where the the lack of conversation is between different sections of our community. There's a lot of advances in other types of data analysis, again, largely with off-site material, both in human and animal remains, bringing in morphometrics, looking at large studies of large populations, large collections of data, but also in the medical sciences, where collections of 3D data is being used for modelling, as in predictive modelling, or to improve orthopedic prosthetics. Where the idea being that they can take relatively small or partial samples of data and extrapolate reliable models of how. I'll skip on a bit. Underlying all this is following on a bit from what Gary was saying, that we need to question ourselves in terms of why we're applying this technology. There's a mismatch between what our technology can do and could be doing for us at the moment and what we're doing with it. Not necessarily because we don't know how to use the technology, but we're not entirely sure what the questions we want to ask of our data are. So we're seeing data which is routinely collected or modified to match the technical abilities of the systems that we're using. And they are then driving the questions which we ask of our data, which then applies the methodology which we carry out on site. And in the fervour for efficiency and cost effectiveness, we've been in danger of forgetting the questions that we would like to ask of our excavation data, had we started from the point of excavation. Okay, I'll stop there.